Good morning. It's Friday, December 12th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 799 days old, and the FDD Morning Brief is now 300 episodes old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer, and apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. So welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Okay, I almost fell off my chair yesterday when I read that Amnesty International accused Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups of war crimes and crimes against humanity. For the record, Amnesty is nasty. For years, this NGO has repeatedly singled out Israel and has given all of Israel's Islamist enemies a free pass. So I guess we should acknowledge this change in mood music with the release of that 173-page report. But before we start handing out gold stars to Amnesty, let's just acknowledge that this report came more than 2 years after the 10/7 attacks. Too little, too late, if you ask me. And for the record, Human Rights Watch, the Red Cross, and so many other legacy NGOs have been a complete disaster since the war began. Today's guest is Aviva Klompas, CEO of Boundless and the host of the Boundless Insights podcast. We caught up yesterday for a conversation that ranged across a whole bunch of topics, including how Israel's war in Gaza impacts Jews in the diaspora, what pardoning Bibi would mean for Israeli society, and our favorite names for Israel's Hezbollah beeper operation. Stay tuned. We're going to play that discussion for you in just a few. All right, let's talk about that rubble in Gaza. The Trump administration has reportedly saddled Israel with the task of removing debris from Gaza after 2 years of war. This is no small task. There's roughly 68 million tons of shattered concrete, twisted rebar, and Lord knows how much trash. Cleaning up or rebuilding the territory of an enemy that attacked you is a uniquely American thing to do. And I got to say, I'm not sure it's worked out so well. Look no further than Iraq or Afghanistan, and you'll see my point. Sure, it worked in places like Japan and Germany, but that was back when democracies had no compunction about bombing enemies into submission. Reconstruction occurred after our enemies surrendered. The goal was to build something better and safer to prevent future wars. That's not happening in Gaza, folks. Hamas is still fighting. And if you ask me, there's a good chance that more rubble is going to be made in Gaza, not less. So here's what I think. Israel shouldn't lift a finger. Instead, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran should be forced to pay for the rubble removal and the reconstruction too. They gave Hamas billions of dollars as the group prepared for this war, and they knew exactly what was coming. So why are we not forcing these regimes to pay for the damage that they caused? It's pretty simple, folks. These countries should be held to account. If they refuse to step up voluntarily, impose sanctions, freeze their assets, send their money to Gaza, and then start to rebuild. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the United States seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. Venezuela is not our usual brief here on this program, but I'm going to tell you this because this particular tanker has previously transported sanctioned oil from Iran. We still need to learn more, but President Donald Trump said the tanker is, quote, very large. You can see that very large tanker in a clip of the operation that Attorney General Pam Bondi posted on X. Trump didn't name the tanker, but maritime tracking firms identified the vessel as the Skipper. The very large tanker was reportedly carrying upwards of 1.1 million barrels of sanctioned crude when U.S. forces seized the ship. What's the U.S. planning to do with all that crude? If I can quote President Trump again, we'll keep it, I guess. Headline 2, Israeli and Taiwanese officials recently conducted a series of secret meetings. Shh, they're secret. Over the last week, Knesset member Ohad Tal reportedly met with Taiwan's vice president, foreign minister, and other diplomats in Taipei. These meetings reportedly came on the heels of discussions in Israel between Taiwan's deputy foreign minister and members of Israel's opposition Blue and White Party. Few details have been published, but Tal told the media that his talks focused on expanding cooperation between Israel and Taiwan on security, economics, and a bunch of other files. It's clear after these 2 years of war that China is not Israel's friend. Beijing has been helping Iran rearm after that 12-day war. And it's done little, if anything, to curb the aggression against Israel during that 7th front war. In other words, Israel and Taiwan are both fighting what we and FDD writ large call the axis of aggressors: China, Russia, Iran. Israel and Taiwan, not to mention Ukraine, are under assault from this axis. If you ask me, it's about time they join forces. Headline 3, the U.S. and Israel wrapped up joint naval exercises yesterday. Over 5 days, the Israeli Navy and the U.S. Fifth Fleet conducted drills across the Med and the Red Sea. The exercises, called Intrinsic Defender. I love how they come up with these names. Anyway, this exercise was intended to strengthen cooperation between the two navies and improve their responses to maritime threats. During the exercises, the Israeli Navy tested out new tech, and they gamed out a range of scenarios, including maritime infiltrations, diving, and search operations, and shipboarding. I hope the Turks were watching, and the Houthis, because both of them have become a menace on the water in recent years. We're going to find out soon enough if that message was, in fact, received. All right. It's now time to press play on that conversation with Aviva Klompas. Let's have a listen. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Aviva Klompas.
Thank you so much for having me back.
It is a pleasure. You're a repeat offender, and we like those. Okay, I want to ask you to just talk for a minute about the organization that you run. You're the CEO of Boundless, and you're also the host of a fun podcast that I like to go on called Boundless Insights. So tell us just a little bit about what you do.
You are a fan favorite on our show. So Boundless was co-founded by me and my very good friend, Dr. Rachel Fish, 4.5 years ago. We describe ourselves as a think action tank, which I think is just, we're trying to be like FDD because you guys are our heroes. But the idea is that Rachel and I had spent a long time looking at the Jewish world, at the state of Israel education, at the state of anti-Semitism. And you don't actually have to be a think tank or a researcher to see that things are just demonstrably worse. Despite the focus, despite the investment, despite the resources and time put into these issues, Israel education is in decline. Anti-Semitism is growing exponentially. And we wanted to understand what are the root causes, get underneath the issues, understand what is going on so that then we can devise interventions and solutions. And that's exactly what we're doing. So in education, we have a partnership, an MOU with Brandeis University, and Rachel is out across the country working with universities, administrators, faculty, high school, middle school educators, helping them understand the modern manifestations of anti-Semitism, understand Zionism, the relationship between the two, and help them navigate the complexities of what we're seeing out there. And then for me, I'm very focused on the discourse. I am very interested in the question of how does a society, a democracy, get to the point where more people will go out week after week and protest and chant for terrorists than for small children or families being held hostage in Gaza? How do we get to that place as a society? What is happening in our media? What is happening in our communications? What is happening on social media? And those are the things that I look at. And then in my infinite spare time, I'm the host of the Boundless Insights podcast, where we break down the news every week. And I love having you on.
And I love joining. Okay, I want to talk to you about some research that you just completed.
Yes.
You shared it with me the other day. I found it fascinating. So tell us, what was this research about and what did you find?
So very much at the core of what Boundless is doing is if we want to devise interventions, then we need to have a real understanding of what Americans know and believe about Jews, about Israel, and about this war. So the most recent study that we undertook was a study to understand the impact of 2 years of war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza on the attitudes of American Jews. And what we found is very distressing. So right off the bat, 42% of Americans, so nearly half of the country, does not distinguish between the Israeli government and Jewish Americans. They are looking at us and thinking of us as if we're the ones that are running the war or deciding on settlement policy or thinking about aid to Palestinians. They're holding us accountable in a way that is grossly unfair. We also saw that tropes have taken hold in a way we haven't seen in this country. So 41% of Americans don't think it's anti-Semitic to claim that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. We also saw a massive gap in their understanding of what is appropriate protest and what is blatant Jew hatred. So as an example, about 40% of Americans don't think it's anti-Semitic to protest outside a synagogue. They see our houses of worship as fair game. 20% of Americans don't see a problem with boycotting a Jewish-owned business. And again, that is just the conflation of believing that we Jewish Americans are the ones on the ground in Gaza.
That's all really disturbing. Maybe not surprising.
Smile.
What?
I try to say it in a way. I'm kind of a downer at parties.
Yeah. Well, I've been called Dr. Doom when I give talks. So we're in good company.
Yeah.
So, okay. It's all really disturbing stuff. Not surprising, right? Like, I mean, none of what you've just told me shocks me. Maybe the numbers are a little surprising, but the general themes here don't surprise me at all. But here's a question. I'm going to muddy the waters here for a minute.
Sure.
We talk in this country about how the fate of the Jewish diaspora and Israel, that our fates are intertwined, right? That we can't abandon Israel. We have to support the war effort because essentially Israel's fate will be the fate of Jews elsewhere around the world. So is it surprising that if this is the message that we have internally amongst like ourselves, that that Americans would kind of understand that and internalize it in some way?
I think the issue, honestly, is that we are hypersensitive for good reason, because of our entire history, because we have sort of a mentality born from being 2 or 3 generations from the Holocaust that tells us that we are people who are chased and persecuted and prosecuted across the nations and across time. And so we're hypersensitive to any sorts of accusations. And now it's doing us a disservice. And I'll explain what I mean. So last week, I was in New Orleans. Combat Anti-Semitism ran a summit for almost 200 mayors and municipal leaders from across North America. And it was very interesting, actually, that the majority were from blue cities. And what I heard from these mayors who were there to address anti-Semitism, so they were well-intentioned, is that it is very, very hard to enter this conversation. They understand anti-Semitism is a problem, but they are so concerned about what they can say that won't unleash a storm of outrage, either on the part of the mob, the Kafia Club lunatics that scream at them, or on behalf of our own community, because we are so hypersensitive. They said to me, I want to criticize the Israeli government for how it is prosecuting this war, but then the Jewish community is outraged at me. So they feel stuck between silence, so saying nothing, and saying the wrong thing. And what we need to figure out is how are we going to educate and communicate with these very well-intentioned people? And we haven't cracked that code yet. We're, I think, a little bit reliant on things like Natan Sharansky and his 3Ds, which are incredibly helpful in a context, but they don't necessarily speak to the realities on the ground of what municipal leaders and leaders of communities are grappling with in this moment.
So, but all right, I'm going to try to unpack this just a little bit more. So they're grappling with this idea that, well, they don't like the war and they want to criticize it. And then we tell them that they
don't like Netanyahu, who's the most
or they don't like Netanyahu, but he is the elected representative of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
And, and that singling him out is not the problem. They should be singling out Hamas. And then so what we find is that, at least a pretty sizable chunk of the Jewish community is supporting the war, and then they're getting caught in the crossfire. So again, we get right back to this place of the conflation of Jews and Israel. And I guess I'm still having a hard time understanding, is that a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, again, the Jewish community is out there trying to defend Israel every day, or at least a lot of the Jewish community is. Right?
Yeah, we're in a catch-22 because anti-Semitism is not ours to solve. It's not a sickness of the Jewish community. And then it's exactly as you said, we're not just going to stand by and watch as Jewish students are harassed on a college campus, as Jewish-owned businesses are targeted and vandalized, as you have these hate mobs marching through the streets supporting terror groups. We can't be silent in that face. But what I think we haven't cracked is being able to explain to the people that are leading our institutions what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I'll give an example. So Natan Sharansky, who I could not possibly admire more, gave the world the 3Ds and how to distinguish between anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism, right? So delegitimization is people who say Israel has no right to exist. Demonization is when Israel is portrayed as uniquely evil. And double standard is basically the United Nations, when Israel is judged by a standard that no other country is held to. But if you're somebody that's trying to look at the modern context of the ways that anti-Semitism is manifesting in the United States, that is a hard measure to try to pick apart. So what I offer in a footnote to Sharansky's work is the two Bs. And I ask, are you a bridge builder or are you a bullshitter? And now I'm sorry, Jonathan, but you need to put an explicit warning on your podcast. But that's the reality.
I'm triggered. Sorry. Go ahead.
You've done worse. A bridge builder is somebody who has good intentions. That's the mayors that I saw last week that have their criticisms of Israel, just like half of Israel has criticisms of Israel and Netanyahu. And they want to be our partners with Israel or partners with the American Jewish community to help us navigate this context or do better as a country. And they have our best interest in mind, as opposed to the bullshitters that are using every means at their disposal, legal, economic, military, political, culture, in trying to undermine Israel with no thought to what that means for Israelis or for Jewish Americans. And this is the difference between when the criticism is about policies. So I don't like how the war is being conducted, or settlements trouble me, or, right? So that's honest criticism versus when it becomes about demonizing us as a people or our existence. Statements like the world would be better without a Jewish state, or Jews are inherently a violent people. It's the difference between criticism grounded in facts and anti-Semitism, which feeds on tropes. So honest criticism is Ben-Gvir's statements are abhorrent and it is doing enormous damage to the state of Israel, versus the tropes of Israel intentionally targets hospitals, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who went on 60 Minutes and said Trump is more pro-Israel than America first because of Jewish control, right? The lady that gave us the space lasers. I guess we've upgraded the space lasers with hypnotic powers now. So good on us.
I'm kind of surprised you haven't mentioned Tucker Carlson in all of this.
I leave that to you. But another good example where we're not talking about policies. We're not talking about real issues. We're not grounded in facts. We are just dealing in tropes and rhetoric and trying to undermine. And that is the other difference, is that criticism is inviting real discussion and debate, and anti-Semitism is always leading to a dead end. It's shutting down conversation. All
right. So now you've done the research, and I guess now you're going to start trying to fix the problem. I know you can't do it on your own, but I think it's important that you're trying to unpack this, understand it, and engage. I do want to ask you, you mentioned Bibi, and you were talking to me before we started recording here about the pardon.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts, if you'll beg my pardon.
I had on my podcast on Boundless Insights, I just spoke about it this week with Dr. Michael Oren. And it's an interesting situation. And I've been listening to other folks. I was listening to JPPI's podcast yesterday, and they've done research. They've done polling on the Israeli public, and most Israelis want the pardon. Now, they don't want it scot-free. They want there to be conditions. But what's interesting to me is Netanyahu says the pardon is necessary in order to unite the country, to end the polarization. And I cannot fathom that handing the man a pardon is going to reunite or pacify anybody. If anything, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to further outrage and polarize people. And so the question becomes is, if most people want the pardon so that this saga that's already been 5 years and is going to be at least another 5 before there could even potentially be a conviction. So 10 years of this division and anger and street protests. If you want that to end, what's the price that he's going to have to pay? And what I think is the guy is kind of a genius. Because why did he put it on the table at all at this time? Because he's in a win-win situation. He, I think, put forward the judicial reform legislation because he had the corruption trial. He was in some legal trouble, and it's easy to go after the courts and say that they're too much power. They're trying to step on my toes. We need to reduce and contain the powers of the courts. Leads to judicial reform. And now he's saying, you know what, give me the pardon. I'll take judicial reform off the table. And then essentially the reason judicial reform was started, because of the conviction, is no longer necessary. So that could be one win if he gets it that way. But even if the president says, no, you don't get the pardon, he's going into an election year being able to fire up his base and say, see what I've been telling you this entire time? Everybody is against us. We can't win in the courts. We can't get a fair shake with the president. And he does exactly what he does, which is use the divisions in the country in order to solidify his space and help to secure another election victory.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think anybody ever accused Bibi of being dumb or inept at politics.
The
man,
three-dimensional chess he plays is
yeah, and everybody else is playing checkers. It really does feel that way, and it's just kind of wild to watch. How this guy is able to sort of play everybody. I will say, I saw this movie it was a documentary on Apple TV. And it's called the Bibi Files. It's produced by Raviv Drucker from Channel 13. It's all in English, by the way, for the folks who are interested in watching. But it actually shows the interrogations of Bibi and Sarah Netanyahu and Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson and a whole host of other characters. I got to say, I'm not convinced that most of those files would stick.
Well, that's what's pretty clear, is that if this trial was taking place in another country, it would be in case 1,000 champagne and cigars. It would be a misdemeanor. It would be a slap on the head.
It would be a slap on the wrist. I understand. The submarine thing, it doesn't look like that one has any
like they could make momentum. The others stick. Right.
The media one, the one about Walla, the news site, that's the one that's sort of the most interesting to me, and I think maybe there's something there,
right? What is positive media coverage? How do you even prove that?
Well, if you can actually show, which I think they were talking about, in this program, that that people were actually sending messages and delivering the preferences of the prime minister based on leverage that he got, financial leverage over the owner of this website. There's something there, but now you got to go ahead and prove it. And 5 plus years of additional trials seems like a lot when Israel's going through everything else that it's going through. The one thing that I will impugn Bibi over is the names of these operations. All these military operations. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that these guys are like they're watching Game of Thrones, right? Guardian of the Walls and Iron Swords. This is silly. Right? You and I have talked about this. We have a way better terminology for these.
You have many skills and talents, and I admire you for many things. But I think the topper of where your skills really lie is coming up with operational names.
Yes. So let's talk about this. I mean, everybody always talks about Operation Grim Beeper, which is clever, right? But I'm partial to.
I'm giving that one a 9.
Oh, 9. Okay, good.
Okay.
How do you like Operation Castration? 10. Okay. Now, Operation Ready? From the liver to the knee. 10 plus. Wow. Yeah. Okay. You make me feel good. All right. We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Aviva Klompas, for all the great work that you do. And thank you for joining us today on the FDD.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Always fun to catch up with Aviva. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Elaine Dezensky testified before the House China Select Committee about the threat posed by Chinese auto industry. The U.S. is importing massive amounts of Chinese auto parts, which will ultimately undermine the North American supply chain. Elaine warns that China didn't earn its share of the market fair and square. Rather, it rose to dominance through non-market manipulation. She advises lawmakers to work with our neighbors in Canada and Mexico to protect our markets and force China to play by the rules. And speaking of Congress and China, FTD's Jennifer Richmond published a policy brief on our website unpacking 3 pieces of legislation working their way through Congress with the aim of protecting American students from foreign influence. The bills are primarily concerned with Chinese money flowing into K-12 classrooms. That's certainly worthy of lawmakers' attention, but Jennifer says that the scope is too narrow. Other countries are using cash to influence American education, and Congress should respond to them too. Here's looking at you, Qatar. That's right, Qatar again. Finally, check out the op-ed that my colleague Saeed Ghassaminejad published in Real Clear World, arguing that the fall of Venezuela's Maduro regime would be a boon for the American oil industry. Contrary to popular belief, the rise of a new government in Venezuela and the revival of its oil industry won't hurt American oil producers. It'll benefit them. It'll kick China, Iran, and Russia out of our neighborhood, cementing U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere for years to come. Gosh, that just sounds like a John Grisham ending. Read the piece. All right. That's going to do it for this Friday episode of the FDD Morning Brief, the big 300. If you're looking for more things to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Catch our quick takes on X, or watch the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. Oh, and don't forget, fdd.org/invest. Invest. Yeah. Tune in Monday for episode number 301. Until then, thanks for joining. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.